Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tearing down a deeply ingrained assumption about life, work, and family. We're going to dive into this incredible paradigm-shifting concept of what it actually means to leave a lasting legacy. Modern society relentlessly conditions us to view legacies strictly through the lens of bank accounts, massive estates, and complex trusts. But thousands of years of ancient wisdom tells a different story. It centers around a very specific principle. Leaving wealth is simply not as good as leaving virtue. It suggests we might be focusing on entirely the wrong metric. So let's dive in.
Section 1. The Illusion of Inheritance.
It's a totally natural instinct, isn't it? As providers, we endure a ton of stress, we sacrifice our own free time, and we meticulously save up just to make sure our kids won't have to struggle the way we did. But that forces a really critical question. What actually constitutes the ultimate legacy? Does leaving behind a massive financial cushion guarantee your child's happiness and security? Well, the source text points out a tragic irony that history just repeats endlessly. Material inheritance often achieves the exact opposite of what we intended. Vast fortunes frequently act as a highly destructive force. We're talking bitter sibling lawsuits, overnight squandering, and a creeping greed that completely rots family harmony from the inside out. And our societal obsession with just stacking up cash, it is heavily backed by data. Take a look at this survey of 1,000 people in southern Taiwan. They were asked what they believed was the ultimate goal for a happy, fulfilled life, and the results were drastically skewed. Out of 1,000, a whopping 600 respondents prioritized wealth, and 500 went with power and authority. But the foundational stuff, family harmony, health, or literally just sharing life with a living spouse, those ranked way, way lower. This data brilliantly exposes a profound societal blind spot. It shows how the vast majority of people mistakenly equate true human fulfillment purely with worldly wealth and status, completely ignoring how incredibly fragile those things actually are. Moving right along to Section 2, Worldly Wealth versus Spiritual Virtue. So, if a pile of money isn't the perfect legacy, what is? To really grasp the alternative, we need to look at the stark dichotomy between the two types of wealth we can leave behind. On one side, you have worldly wealth. This is your fiat money, real estate, jewels, physical assets. These are highly perishable, temporary material goods. On the flip side, we have spiritual wealth, often referred to as Dharma wealth in the texts. This encompasses immortal virtues, accumulated merits, charitable deeds, and the guiding moral frameworks you pass down. Here's the thing. Worldly wealth is fundamentally bound to this lifetime. You literally cannot take it with you. Spiritual wealth, however, that endures across generations. It keeps working and positively influencing the world long after you're gone. This dual reality is perfectly captured in an amazing ancient proverb from the source text. Money can support a boat, and money can sink a boat. Wealth isn't inherently evil, and it isn't inherently good either. It's just an amplifier. It can absolutely support the boat by funding vital education, crucial charity, and broad societal progress. But if you hand that exact same wealth down to descendants who lack a strong moral compass, it rapidly transforms. It becomes this crushing weight of greed, laziness, and entitlement that ultimately sinks the family's future entirely. Which brings us to Section 3, the three-generation curse. The fragility of material inheritance is not just some abstract philosophical concept. It is an undeniable, observable historical pattern. The source material highlights a really famous sociological axiom: wealth does not survive 3 generations. Why is worldly wealth so consistently fragile? Well, because it's infinitely vulnerable to shifting external forces. Massive estates and fortunes inevitably fall victim to fluctuating economies, severe natural disasters, fire, and water, but most devastatingly, they fall victim to unprepared descendants. History constantly shows us that 1,000 years of careful property ownership can change hands hundreds of times in the blink of an eye. We actually see this historical pattern play out in 3 incredibly predictable stages. First up, you have the pioneer generation. They build the wealth through extreme hardship, blood, sweat, and tears. Because they suffered for it, they intimately know its exact cost and value. Second is the inheriting generation. Now, they generally maintain the wealth pretty well, mostly because they grew up observing their parents' intense struggles. They respect the effort. But then comes the third stage, the reaping generation. Born into pure comfort, shielded entirely from that initial struggle, they lack any fundamental understanding of the wealth's true value. And consequently, they're the ones who predictably squander a century of hard work and sacrifice virtually overnight. Let's pivot to Section 4. How virtue protects descendants. This brings us to the core paradigm shift of our source material, the idea that leaving virtue is a far more enduring, powerful, and fiercely protective legacy than leaving capital.
I want you to consider this staggering number, 77. This represents the 77th generation of Confucius's descendants. The text notes that when a specific descendant, Kong de Cheng, of the 77th generation, traveled across Asia to places like Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, massive, highly emotional crowds gathered. And why? Simply to honor his lineage and pay their deepest respects.
That brilliantly illustrates the timeless, almost indestructible nature of spiritual wealth. Just think about the contrast here for a second. Confucius left behind absolutely zero financial assets, no sprawling global estates, no hidden hoards of gold, yet his spiritual legacy, his teachings, his unparalleled virtue, and his accumulated merit created this incredible protective halo effect. It continues to honor and elevate his descendants thousands of years later. Compare that centuries-long global reverence to modern billionaires whose vast, supposedly impenetrable fortunes routinely just vanish into thin air in a matter of decades.
The text emphasizes a beautiful overarching law of human legacy. Any family that creates merit and virtue will uplift its descendants. Spiritual merit serves as the ultimate impenetrable shield. It is positioned as the only true protection against inevitable life hardships. And crucially, it's the absolute only inheritance that cannot be heavily taxed, abruptly stolen, or squandered by a careless heir. When you leave a legacy of virtue, you're leaving an unextinguishable guiding light that will navigate your descendants through their darkest moments.
So Section 5, building your spiritual legacy.
Okay, so how do we actually operationalize this philosophy? How do we put it into practice? We're going to transition now to the actionable steps derived directly from the source text, so you can start building this eternal legacy today. First, sacrifice wealth to build virtue. Second, maintain a broad and compassionate mind. Third, establish genuine vows and commitments to do good. And fourth, cultivate merit by serving as a living, breathing moral example. Notice how that very first point fundamentally flips modern financial logic completely on its head. It posits that utilizing your physical wealth for the greater societal good actually transforms perishable fiat currency into indestructible spiritual equity. It's an incredible reframe.
Let's dig into the concept of a broad mind for a second. The text defines this as fostering and accommodating, deeply generous spirit. It is the exact psychological opposite of a petty, highly calculating worldview that is strictly focused on your own household's isolated financial gain. A genuinely forgiving and open heart creates the fertile ground necessary for virtue to actually grow. It leaves a lasting positive psychological imprint on absolutely everyone you interact with, and that generates a compounding ripple effect of goodwill that vastly outlasts your physical life. All of this culminates in a really powerful teaching from the source. Sacrifice wealth to cultivate virtue, and the spiritual soul will be bright. The message here is crystal clear. If you possess financial abundance, do not merely hoard it in an account for a third generation to inevitably squander. Deploy it. Actively use it to alleviate human suffering during emergencies. Fund positive, uplifting societal endeavors. By deliberately detaching from the endless cycle of material accumulation and utilizing money purely as a utility tool for benevolence, you achieve true, unassailable wealth in the eyes of the universe. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question that fundamentally challenges our modern daily grind. Will you leave a legacy that merely survives for a fleeting moment, or one that actively protects your lineage for eternity? The profound choice between building a highly fragile worldly fortune and cultivating an immortal virtue is entirely in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I sincerely hope this deep dive inspires you to profoundly redefine the metrics of what you are truly working for every single day.